So my first question is like, I obviously am meeting you for the very first time. Chris, I would love if you were like, hey, stranger on the street, this is how I would normally introduce myself and like who I am and what I do.
Yeah. The way I actually usually frame it up is like, if you're meeting a stranger at the bar, right? So I run a show called Manufacturing Happy Hour. So my first question is always, hey, describe what you do as a manufacturer as if you're having a drink with someone, right?
Cool.
And in this case, what Manufacturing Happy Hour is all about, it is a show that I started back in like 2016 as a way to go beyond the buzzwords in our industry.
Okay.
Back in 2016, I think this has improved now. We used a lot of jargon, and we found a way to make manufacturing a very cool industry that makes a lot of cool stuff. We found a variety of ways to describe it in a very boring fashion. So I'm like,
a lot of acronyms,
a lot of 3-letter
Simon
things.
Sinek's really against those acronyms. He doesn't like those.
I am too. So the ethos of Manufacturing Happy Hour, which remains to this day, is let's have a candid conversation about the biggest trends and technologies and issues that manufacturers are facing, and let's talk about them the same way you would as if you're having a beer with someone. So
love it.
A very appropriate way of doing this.
Cheers to you then. Yeah, it's really lovely to meet you.
It's great to be here.
This is the first time that I've got to interview someone that has actually done Manufacturing Happy Hour isn't even your first podcast. You've been in this game for quite some time, and you definitely know how to do this. So when it comes to the drinks that you have on your podcast, what are you typically starting with and or giving you guests? Because I'm sure you've experienced some people can handle certain kinds of alcohol, and sometimes it don't fly as well when it comes to a podcast. What's your favorite to kind of start with in general if it's a new person you've not met with?
Yeah, and I should add some context. I do about half of my interviews to this day in person over beers. When I started it back in 2016, every interview had to be over a beer.
Okay.
But once I increased the frequency and the time of day we were doing these, I'm like, okay, we got to set some ground rules here.
You probably had to have some boundaries so you're not drinking all the time.
Exactly. So we established that. But when we're having a beverage, I try to meet up at a bar or brewery that is special to my guest, or if they're coming to Milwaukee where I live, a place that's special to me that has some local character.
Mm-hmm.
And it's best to order the local beverage or a drink that place specializes in.
Absolutely.
When it comes to beer, people always ask me, hey, what's your favorite beer? And that's kind of a hard, almost unfair question as a beer aficionado.
Yeah.
But as a Midwesterner that gets all 4 seasons throughout the year, my simple response is I love seasonal beer. Something that goes with the time of year, time of day. Miller High Life right here on a hot summer day, perfect type of beer. I'm drinking something a little heftier than that. You were just enjoying a Bell's Two Hearted as well.
Yep.
Essentially what's close to a double IPA brewed with Centennial hops, a very classic American hop. That might be a little much for a day like this, but you got to go with the local classic when you're somewhere. So
cool. Well, you are at the Reindustrialize Conference here right now, and you host a pod, and tickets to this conference are like $3,000, which is like no joke when it comes to showing up for a conference. I'm super curious for you, why did you want to come to this conference, and why is it so important for you as someone that's hosts a podcast in this space to be a part of this kind of conference?
Yeah, it's a great question. And yes, you highlighted the price tag, and it is steep, but I do think that tends to bring a high caliber of individual, and certainly an individual that's invested in being in there at that event. So I knew there were going to be people in the industrial community that were movers and shakers, folks that were making an impact and wanted to meet other people making an impact. As a podcaster here, I'm a little unique. The sense I've got from this crowd, this is my first time attending, so I'm just getting the lay of the land.
Yeah,
so I've had the day to get familiar with the event, and it's a mix of startups, venture capital. There are companies that have been in the manufacturing industry for decades, or some case like a century, that are represented here. So it's a great mix of folks. There are policymakers as well. And it's a very unique style of conference because a lot of times I go to places where it's the big established companies and folks that have been maybe a mom and pop machine shop for decades, enterprise manufacturers. And I know as a podcaster that speaks to that audience quite a bit, that there's this audience that's here, Reindustrialize, that I think is a bit more geared towards the startup and the people that really want to take risks and drive the needle forward in industry. Not to say that there aren't those folks that have been in this industry for a long time that don't want to drive it forward. There absolutely are. And that's what the majority of my conversations on my podcast are about. But this is a group where, let me put it this way, a conversation I have with a lot of old school manufacturers is, how do we get the next generation into the manufacturing workforce? How do we get folks that are excited about it?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
What I'd say I've noticed about this audience is everyone here is already really freaking excited about it.
Okay.
And they're asking the questions of, how do we bring the manufacturing industry back to the US, leveraging new technologies and artificial intelligence and ways we haven't manufactured before?
Okay.
They are truly reimagining the manufacturing industry. Maybe sometimes in over aspirational ways, and I think that's okay, which is why I want to start seeing what I call new school manufacturers and old school manufacturers coming together.
Kind of like the practical side met with maybe some of like the more dreamer states, but like, how do you bridge those two together?
100%. That's
Okay.
where my head is at right now. And I think there's a mix of both dreaming and practicality on both sides. I think one skews more towards, let's solve the big problems that no one's tried to tackle yet. And others skew more towards, hey, we're established companies. We've got
an order that we got to fulfill.
Yeah, we got to keep making stuff and fulfilling those existing customer orders.
Yeah.
So I think it's a beautiful mix. I do think there's an opportunity to bring these communities together a little bit more.
Okay.
And that is something I'm taking it upon myself as one of the individuals that can be a solution to that over the course of the next year, 2 years, etc. Because I am plugged in with both of these groups now.
Awesome. That's very interesting. So, what could the average person learn from a conference like this? Because obviously manufacturing is kind of a large topic and a lot of people don't even understand the nuts and bolts of what goes into it. So for me, I'm curious for you, like, what are you taking away from this conference? But also, like, what could the average person learn from a conference like this and how it maybe applies into their life, even if they weren't aware of it?
Yeah, I'll start with what I think the average person could learn from this conference, because my answers for me personally are going to be a bit more specific and nuanced. I'll share those second. What an average person can learn from this conference is that when we talk about bringing manufacturing back to the United States, I believe that's a very vague way of describing what we want to do, and quite frankly, doesn't really do a good job of describing what we want to do.
Okay.
Because when you hear that, I think people's immediate reaction, it's like, well, why are we going to bring a dirty factory that makes Nike shoes back to the U.S.,
Okay.
right? We've never actually really done a lot of Nike shoe manufacturing in the U.S. That's a different story.
Right.
But they're thinking it's like, we're going to bring back the manufacturing of the 60s and 70s.
Right.
Which
And
is
a lot of those plants have closed and there's a lot of stuff that's been like it's disenfranchised a little bit.
Or those plants have been drastically updated since then.
Okay.
They're cleaner, they're safer, they're higher tech. When we talk about bringing back manufacturing, or to use the label the conference says, as when we talk about reindustrializing, we're going to manufacture in a new way.
Okay.
We're going to manufacture leveraging automation and robotics, and we're still going to need to employ an insane amount of people to do it. I think
Right.
what we need to do as someone that's inside of the manufacturing industry, I take it upon myself as someone that says we need to do a better job of educating the general public that we're at risk of having literally millions of manufacturing jobs going unfilled.
Mhm.
I think there are already something like 500,000 open jobs in
Right
the
now.
U.S. manufacturing
Wow.
industry. So when we talk about automating, we're not talking about automating someone out of a job. We're talking about automating so the process is safer, cleaner, and more attractive to someone that would work in the industry as, let's say, a robot operator, a robot technician, something like that. We're creating a brand new type of job in the manufacturing industry that someone with a college degree in engineering, for example, or someone that went to trade school, for example, it's the type of job that they would find attractive.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. I'm going to give you a second to actually have a drink of beer. And then so you can have some of your Two Hearted. But then also I want to talk a little bit about the manufacturer's happy hour. Like
Sure.
your podcast. Mostly because like there's always like these niche podcasts out there. And I definitely did not realize that there was a whole dedicated podcast little does the audience know, but you got like over 20,000 followers on LinkedIn. So people are clearly interested in this space, and you have a very specific realm that you're living in. What is the most joyful part of doing a podcast in this space that maybe would surprise the average person or someone that doesn't know anything about manufacturing?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just chatting with someone earlier today at the conference who is about to start her own manufacturing podcast.
Mhm.
And she's like, "What tips can you give me?" And one of the things I say as a niche podcaster, just to give you an idea, you mentioned I've got 20,000 LinkedIn followers. I get about 1,000 people tuning into Manufacturing Happy Hour every week. And over the course of it's a weekly podcast. And over the course of a month, I get 2,000 unique individuals listening. That's a great sized audience
Yeah, it's
for
wonderful.
a niche manufacturing show.
Yeah.
If you think about, I mean, a 2,000 person concert hall,
That's awesome.
that's like a sellout for a lot of big punk rock bands,
Yes.
for example. So it's a big audience that's listening. But it's not necessarily, let's say, mainstream podcast, millions of people tuning in every week. So understand that you're going to have a niche audience that you can build a community around. I'll get to that in a second. But I think one of the most valuable, interesting parts about what I do, and this is what I told the individual that was starting their podcast, I said, the most valuable part, especially right out of the gate, is the relationships you're going to build with your guests. By doing a weekly show, I get to build 52 relationships a year with a manufacturing leader, a mover and shaker in the industry. And those are relationships that often last much longer than
that 1 week.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that was my advice to a fellow podcaster that's about to jump in. Like, don't necessarily worry about the listener numbers. Those will grow over time. But just know your immediate ROI is the relationships you're building.
That's
So that's one of the first things I say. But as a niche podcaster, that, again, we're not pulling in the millions of listeners every week. We've got a really strong core community. I've been able to capitalize on that community aspect and throw events. You know, we're here in Detroit. I was just at the Automate conference here 2 months ago. We threw something like an 800-person party at Batch Brewing just down the street from here. Yeah, and we're talking 800 people on the night coming and going throughout the evening. But it was
awesome.
It was packed. So it's not only
Did you do a live podcast there?
You know what? This is an interesting question. I've learned over time that doing a live podcast after a full day of people being at a trade show is a tough order because people are just like, I've been standing at the booth all day. I need to kick it. I need to relax. So we didn't do a live podcast there, but we had a great celebration with a ton of people in our community. And it really, that's one of the beautiful things about having a podcast called Manufacturing Happy Hour. I don't have to change the name at all when I'm throwing an event. It's like, hey, come to the Manufacturing Happy Hour. So works out well.
That's great. That's wonderful. Cool. All right. Obviously, when you're doing a podcast, you're meeting a lot of people, you're creating a lot of connections. Obviously, there's a piece of storytelling that has to be a part of all of that because you're trying to make connections. In my line of work, storytelling is the fastest way that you can make a connection happen. Yeah. But I'm curious for you, why storytelling is important to you as a podcaster, but also in the manufacturing space.
This is a great question for multiple reasons. So why is it important as a podcaster? Then why is it important as a manufacturer? Why it's important as a podcaster is the way I always describe Manufacturing Happy Hour or how people are consuming the content on Manufacturing Happy Hour. They're usually at the gym, they're driving in the car, they're doing the dishes, they're doing something else when they're listening to the show. So in order to help the audience remember the things we're talking about, we can't just be naming nebulous facts and figures and this is the ROI of installing this piece of equipment. I coach my guests in advance of doing the interview. It's like, hey, if you have great stories that illustrate how you mentored a new employee or how you implemented a new product line and what the results were and how you got that off the ground. That's why it's so important for podcasting because people aren't necessarily going to remember the facts and figures you share on a show, but they are going to remember the stories you tell. And in my mind, if someone can walk away from a podcast with one major takeaway or one thing that shifts their mindset, changes their mindset, helps them in their job, helps them in their community, whatever it is, that's a huge win. And this is even more important for manufacturing, which, as I mentioned at the start, it's an industry where we used a lot of buzzwords and it's a lot of engineers. There are facts and figures.
It can feel dry sometimes.
Exactly. So stories are the way to really bring that to life.
That's awesome. Oh, it's so cool. Okay. Off the top of your head, what is a good piece of advice for someone struggling with marketing, especially in the manufacturing space?
Ooh, there are a lot of things I could say on this. I do a lot of different things. I'll share some of the things that I do as a podcaster and as a marketer of the podcast myself, and hopefully let people kind of use it as a grab bag of tips they can take.
Okay.
I mentioned that as manufacturing happy hour is also like an event series and things like that. I do podcast tours. I throw after parties at conferences. One simple thing I always recommend people do is take photos at their marketing events, right? A lot of companies host events and things like that. But oftentimes they're relying on like not a photographer. They're relying on people to take selfies and things like that. They don't really have like a good event documentation strategy. One of the best things you can do with those photos is throw them on Google Photo the next day or in a couple days shortly after the event and send that as a link to everyone that came and said, thank you for coming. By the way, you're seeing us share some photos on social media. Feel free to go through and share these as well, right? You amplify it through your community. That's one of the tips I always share. When it comes to content, like podcasting, for example, you just need to be deliberate and consistent about your approach. I think some people feel like, oh, we got to be on this channel and that channel. We've got to start a podcast and a YouTube series. I would pick like one or two places to be really consistent right out of the gate. And that could be starting a podcast, or that could just be being more disciplined with your social media strategy and equipping your sales team or employees to amplify that message as well and coaching them on how to share that content. That's one avenue. Let's say you went the route of a podcast. You don't even need to start your own podcast. You could say, hey, here are 4 individuals within our company that are charismatic, they're smart, they have different roles. We feel they represent different parts of our organization. Let's focus on getting them on other podcasts that are relevant to our industry and our audience. So
get them on somebody else's. Yeah.
Exactly. So I could go on this avenue of conversation for a while, but my main coaching would be pick a couple places where you can share your story. That could be social media, your podcast, other podcasts, YouTube, whatever that is. Double down on those and get those right before you start trying to be in 3 places, 4 places, 5 places. I think this is really pertinent advice, especially for manufacturers that oftentimes don't really have any sort of robust social media strategy. So when you're just getting it off the ground, pick a couple spots where you know your audience is hanging out, right? Like LinkedIn, I think for my industry is a very logical spot because that's a B2B type audience. Pick those, double down on those, and get good at reaching your audience that way first.
It makes a ton of sense. So I do have a brief follow-up, especially around that in the manufacturing space, because of where we're at in Detroit, in the Midwest, I've had the honor of having clients that have been in the manufacturing space. A lot of those organizations, in my opinion, typically are leaning more towards sales and don't necessarily understand the through line of storytelling and marketing and how that can support sales in finding new customers. I'm sure you've been asked this a zillion times by a CEO or the head of sales at a manufacturing organization. Like, how are you trying to move them forward so that they understand, like, hey, this is actually all tied together?
Yeah. I mean, sales and marketing alignment is kind of the way I address this topic quite a bit. And I think marketing needs to have a sales mindset in some regards, and sales needs to have that marketing mindset in some regards. And I think for context, I worked for an automation company for 10 years as a salesperson. So
you very much know it.
I have the sales background and then went into marketing. So my own personal journey was me starting to realize it's like, hey, there's an audience out there that's hanging out on social media and places like that. It doesn't take me much time to share an insight that I picked up during that last week at work from social media once a week. I tell people, especially sales folks, it's like maybe schedule 30 minutes the same way you would a sales call with a customer just to share something that's an industry insight on LinkedIn, or schedule out your LinkedIn posts for a week. That's some coaching that I've given. On the marketing side, I always encourage marketing teams to get engaged with their sales folks. Look for the folks out there that are kind of taking the advice that I just shared. If you're a marketing organization and you see 1 or 2 salespeople out of, let's say, 20 sales folks that are getting on social media a bit more, find ways to amplify their voice. Invite them in. Do what we're doing right now. Record like a little session where we're getting some insights. Not only can you release that as a podcast episode, but you could chop that up into little micro insights that you release on a little basis. And then here's the best thing. The marketing team has shown interest in the sales team being amplifiers for their brand. I can guarantee you if that salesperson is already sharing content on their own, they're going to take the content that the marketing team is starting to prepare, especially if there's that human element that's built around them a little bit. They're going to share that as well. Absolutely. You've just created new arms for your marketing organization. So there are things sales can do to be better marketers, and there are things marketers can do to be better, to integrate with the sales team a little bit more. And I think that's my advice on both sides of the coin.
Cool. This one's real specific, especially around the Midwest. So why is your work and this conference important for the Midwest specifically?
Yeah, I'll give a little Midwest plug first. I was living in California when I started manufacturing happy hour, and when I decided to go full time with it, and I was bootstrapping my business, I didn't need any VC money out there on Sand Hill Road. I'm like, I need to go somewhere where I don't have to worry about my rent payment. So I moved back to the Midwest. I went to college in Milwaukee. I'm from St. Louis. It was a coin flip. Decided to go to Milwaukee. I moved back to start my company in Milwaukee, to start doing it full time in Milwaukee. Why is it important to the Midwest? I mean, there's just so much there's just so much manufacturing going on here. So in addition to it being an affordable, great lifestyle spot for me to start my business, I have access to Chicago. I have access to Detroit. Conferences like this are constantly taking place here. Needless to say, the type of person I need to be interacting with is always within easy reach. And by the way, I live 8 minutes from the Milwaukee airport and 70 minutes from O'Hare as well. I can get to either side of the country within 2 to 4 hours, wherever I need to be. So it's just a very logical spot for me to access pretty much anyone I'd need to talk to for my business. So that's why this is so important for the Midwest. And at the same time, manufacturing is going to be one of the things that helps the Midwest resurge. We're already seeing it. Like, you walk around Detroit right now, downtown is beautiful. Going on Michigan Street in Corktown is an awesome spot to hang out. Like, I would have never imagined that being the vibe here when I was living out in California in 2015.
Right.
But it's a cool spot to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, what's next for you? Like, what should people look forward to when it comes to your work, the podcast, and just in general?
Yeah, well, I'll answer this in context of the Reindustrialize Conference that we're at right now. I'm going to be sharing the stories of some of these startups and VCs and manufacturers that are here over the course of the next year. I'm always trying to find ways to mix up my content to feature a cool new product someone is making, or an insight or perspective from a venture capitalist who has a background working for large manufacturers, but is now on the VC side. I'm always trying to help my audience learn from the different perspectives and different roles and different players within the manufacturing ecosystem. So I would say, as a result of being here at Reindustrialize and just what my audience is asking for in terms of what I share on the show, you're going to be hearing more like perspectives from more roles and different types of people and different types of companies on manufacturing happy hour very soon.
Cool. Very cool. All right. My last question is really around what surprises people about what you do, because I'm sure when you lead with, I work on a podcast and I host after conference events, that some people got to be like, you can make a living doing this?
I mean, that is what most people are surprised by. They're like, how do you make money doing this? And it is a good question, right? Podcasts have sponsorships. I think unique to my business is there's a whole event side to what I do. The same way a band goes on tour, I'm able to do different tours with manufacturing happy hour as well, and throw mini events in different cities. Like, for example, I was just doing a tour that went through Grand Rapids, Chicago, and Minneapolis last year. This year we hit Indianapolis, Columbus, and Toledo. And it's a great way to bring the manufacturing happy hour community together. So between throwing events and, support from my sponsors and things like that of the show, those are the ways I'm able to make this a full-time gig. But you were answering the question. Like, the number one thing that shocks people, like, okay, so you're a manufacturing podcaster. Like, how does that make money? You're not necessarily selling a product per se. So that's a little bit of the behind the scenes on how this all works.
Cool. I think it's really awesome. And then I just thought about something, and mostly because obviously I'm meeting you through Ted Veely. The connection is to the Midwest House. And
Yeah.
they just launched something there called Start Midwest. It's all about startups and the Midwest manufacturing space, but also just VC funds. I mean, like everything that's going on in the Midwest that's actually innovative and creative. Since you've moved back here, are you surprised by what's actually occurring in the Midwest? Or is this like, oh, this is what I was hoping for, and like it's now actually coming to fruition? Like, where are you at in that journey?
You know what? I'm going to maybe answer this a little contrarian. I wasn't surprised. I'm like, I've been
Really?
seeing, I saw the coasts getting built up. Like, for context, I spent the first 4 years of my career working in Houston, Texas,
Okay.
which was kind of going through its own resurgence from 2011 to 2015 when I was there. And I kind of got to the Bay Area in the middle of all the tech boom that was
Gotcha.
going on out there in 2015. And I was already sensing like people were moving back to the Midwest and these cities were getting built up. And for context, I worked for Rockwell Automation, so I was traveling back to Milwaukee periodically during the
So
time I was out there.
You got to see a little bit.
I knew it was coming up, and I just, I saw the way rents were rising and where the way cities were getting more crowded out on the coasts. I'm like, you know what? Other people, I'm not alone in thinking it's like, if I go back to the Midwest, I can start a business, or
Okay.
I can go back to the Midwest. For example, I love snowboarding. I love the outdoors. I love paddleboarding. I go paddleboarding more often in Lake Michigan than I did out in the Bay
Right.
in San Francisco.
It's a lot
So-
smoother.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Less waves and things like that. So you can bring a lot of that lifestyle with you. Like,
Okay.
I was definitely attracted to the West Coast lifestyle. I started realizing I could bring 80% of that with me and also have all the advantages of building and growing a business in the Midwest.
Awesome. Cool. Chris, I really appreciate your time. It's really lovely to meet you. This is the best part about interviewing you so far is that you clearly know how to answer questions and are used to asking them at the same
I've
time.
been behind the mic before.
Yeah.
This was great. You ran
Yeah.
a great interview. I appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely, man.
We'll end with a
Cheers.
little cheers. Thanks so much.
Yeah.